what if the most successful utopian countries on Earth are actually running this massive hidden deficit that threatens to basically bankrupt the planet?
Right. I mean, it really is the ultimate accounting trick of the 21st century.
Yeah,
We look at a nation with incredible wealth, long lifespans, top-tier equality, and we call it a complete success. But we are only looking at half the ledger.
exactly. For decades, we have all shared this almost biological expectation of what progress actually looks like. It's an upward curve, you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. The classic hockey stick graph.
Right. You build better hospitals, people live longer. You build better schools, people earn more money. And we've treated that upward curve as the absolute, unquestionable proof that a society is working perfectly.
Which makes sense on the surface.
It does.
Yeah.
But then you look at a nation that has essentially beaten the game, like a country sitting comfortably in the global elite, and
Right.
suddenly someone hands you a totally different balance sheet.
Yeah, the real cost.
Exactly. And that pristine upward curve of human development starts looking more like a heavy, unsustainable fortress built on a very fragile, finite fault line.
Which is exactly what the research you sent us for this deep dive reveals. It is a complete structural paradox.
It really is.
The higher these top-tier nations climb in human well-being, the heavier their underlying ecological debt becomes.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the materials you compiled and sent in for us to review are absolutely fascinating.
So incredibly thorough.
Right. You've given us this incredibly detailed 15-slide academic presentation outline. And backing it up are thousands of rows of raw, year-by-year CSV data tracking Austria from 1990 all the way to 2023.
And using Austria as the ultimate case study to explore this paradox was a brilliant choice.
It really was. And before we get into the numbers, I just want to acknowledge how you structured this presentation deck. You stripped away all the noise.
Oh yeah, the design choices are striking.
So stark. Minimalist white backgrounds, flat deep gray text, no distracting 3D graphics, no highly saturated colors.
Just clinical, precise data visualization.
Exactly. It just forces us to confront a really uncomfortable reality
Yeah.
without any sugarcoating.
It's the perfect approach, honestly, because the data itself is so jarring, you really don't need to dress it up.
No, you don't.
When you look at the raw statistics of human development versus planetary extraction, I mean, the numbers just scream for themselves.
And that brings us right to the core paradox you established on the very first slide of your presentation, the hook.
The suspense slide.
Right. You presented us with two massive contrasting data points right in the center of the screen. On the left side, you have Austria's global rank in human development. They are 22nd in the entire world.
That is elite tier, truly elite.
That's amazing.
They are a global template for human well-being, public health, and societal stability. They're safely in the world's first echelon.
But on the right side of that same slide, there is this striking red downward arrow. And I have to point something out here for you, the listener.
Oh, right, the typo in the draft.
Yeah, in your initial outline, you playfully teased a drop of nearly 1/5, but there was a typo in the draft text that labeled it as a mere 1.6% drop.
Right, and a 1.6% dip in a national metric would be concerning.
Sure.
Maybe a sign of a mild recession or a temporary policy failure, but it wouldn't be a catastrophe.
But when we dove into the actual CSV data you provided, the true staggering number reveals itself.
It's massive.
When you account for the hidden ecological factors like the actual physical cost of Austria's lifestyle, their Human Development Index doesn't just dip by 1.6%. It evaporates by a massive 18.6%.
Nearly 1/5.
Yes. Nearly 1/5 of their Human Development Score just vanishes the second the Earth's carrying capacity is factored in.
It's a complete shock to the system. You're looking at an index score that is exceptionally high, and it just plummets the moment you ask the planet to foot the bill.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. How does a nation that serves as a global template for health, wealth, and equality simultaneously act as a massive ecological debtor?
How do we reconcile the penthouse of human development with the cracking foundation it's built on?
Exactly. But to really understand the severity of this fall, we first have to understand the climb. We have to look at the historical context of Austria's success.
Absolutely. We can't really critique the ecological cost without fully acknowledging the incredible heights of human well-being Austria has actually achieved.
Right.
And slide 2 of your deck, tracking the Human Development Index, or HDI, from 1990 to 2023 is the perfect place to start.
For the listener who might just hear HDI thrown around in the news, let's ground this. What exactly is the Human Development Index?
Good question.
Because it's not just a measure of how much money a country has, right?
Correct. The HDI was actually created by the United Nations back in 1990, which, by the way, perfectly aligns with the start date of the data set we are looking at.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah. Before 1990, economists mostly just looked at gross domestic product, or GDP. They just counted the money.
It's just a giant cash register.
Exactly. But economists like Amartya Sen argued that having money doesn't mean much if you don't have the freedom, the health, or the education to actually use it.
Right. What good is a rich country if everyone is sick?
Exactly. So the HDI was born as a composite index. It measures 3 dimensions: a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living.
And it's scored from 0 to 1, right?
Yes, a score from 0 to 1, 1 being absolute theoretical perfection.
And tracing the simple, smooth line graph you designed for slide 2, it is a story of remarkable, almost relentless resilience.
It really is.
In 1990, Austria's HDI was 0.832. Over the next 33 years, it steadily marches upward, and you put a little dashed circle at the end of the line highlighting 2023.
Hitting that elite 0.930.
Yes, we don't see any lost decades here. Even through the dot-com bust, the 2008 global financial crisis, a global pandemic, the trend is undeniably stubbornly upward.
What's fascinating here is why that curve is so smooth.
Yeah.
Your research breaks it down beautifully in slide 3 by isolating the specific engines driving that score.
The double-axis chart.
Right, because, as we said, an HDI score isn't just an abstract grade. It's driven by very tangible realities on the ground. And in Austria's case, the primary engines of that 33-year climb were money and time.
Wealth and health.
Exactly, the dual-wheel drive of human progress.
Let's talk about the wealth first. Your visual design here uses a light gray bar chart for income and a dark blue line for lifespan. The data isolates the gross national income, or GNI, per capita.
Yeah.
In 1990, the data shows an average income of about $46,156. And by 2023, you have a big upward arrow showing that number skyrocketing to $63,479.
A huge jump.
It is. Now, let me clarify something for the listener. The data specifically notes this is adjusted for 2021 PPP dollars. Can you explain the mechanics of that?
Sure.
We aren't just looking at raw currency exchange rates.
Right, exactly. PPP stands for Purchasing Power Parity. If we just looked at raw exchange rates between the old Austrian shilling, the euro, and the US dollar over 30 years, the data would be an absolute mess of inflation and currency fluctuation.
Just noise.
Pure noise. PPP cuts through all of that. It essentially asks, what basket of actual goods, like bread, rent, gasoline, medical care, could this money buy locally?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it standardizes the wealth so we can compare 1990 accurately to 2023. And what the data shows is a roughly 37% increase in real economic power per person.
Wow. A 37% increase in actual usable wealth. That is a massive transformation in a single generation.
It's life-changing.
And what does a highly developed European society do with a 37% increase in real wealth? They buy time.
They absolutely do.
They invest heavily in universal health care, public sanitation, workplace safety regulations, advanced medical research. That economic power directly translated into biological longevity.
The life expectancy data in this set is just beautiful to look at. In 1990, an Austrian citizen could expect to live 75.7 years.
Okay.
By 2023, that jumps to nearly 82 years. Specifically 81.95 years.
I want the listener to really pause and think about the mechanics of what that means on a human level. An entire society just collectively gained over 6 extra years of life.
Yeah, it's wild when you phrase it like that.
It doesn't happen by accident. That isn't just good genetics. That is an enormous, deliberate achievement in public health infrastructure.
It requires an incredibly robust system. You have to reduce infant mortality to near zero. You have to manage chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease in the elderly population much more effectively.
Right.
You have to reduce fatal workplace accidents, traffic fatalities. Every single one of those requires massive, sustained public funding.
It's like upgrading both your car's engine and its fuel tank at the exact same time. You're going significantly faster with that higher income, and you're going much further with those extra years of life.
And if we look closely at the granular year-by-year CSV data, you can see just how resilient this welfare state is.
Oh, you mean during the economic crashes?
Exactly. Look at the 2008 financial crisis. The data shows Austria's GNI dropped briefly from about $64,000 to $61,000.
A noticeable hit.
But the life expectancy line, it barely stutters. It keeps ticking upward. The social safety nets in Austria, the guaranteed health care, the unemployment benefits are so strong that even severe economic shocks don't immediately cause a collapse in public health.
That's incredible.
The state absorbs the blow so the human body doesn't have to.
That is a crucial point. The collective wealth of the nation is acting as a shock absorber for the individual. But that naturally leads us to ask the next big question of your presentation framework. High income and long lives on a national average are great, but who actually gets to enjoy them? Is this progress concentrated at a boys' club? Is it only for the elite? Or is this wealth and time shared equally across the population?
Which is the perfect transition into slide 4, focusing on social equity and gender.
The visual models you designed for the Gender Inequality Index, the GII, are incredibly striking.
Yeah.
You use this minimalist gray step-down chart.
The cliff drop.
Yeah, exactly. Now, just to make sure we are reading the mechanics of this correctly, a lower score on the GII is better, right? 0 would represent perfect, absolute equality between men and women.
Correct. The GII is another complex United Nations metric. It measures inequality across 3 dimensions: reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market.
Okay.
A high score means women are severely disadvantaged. A score of 0 means women and men fare equally across all those civic and biological metrics.
Well, the data shows that in 1990, Austria's GII was 0.195. By 2023, it was absolutely crushed down to 0.033.
Just a free fall in inequality. You drew this bold circle around the 2023 number with an arrow pointing to a note that says, entered global top 10, 10th in the entire world. That is a monumental sociological shift.
And the mechanics of this victory are where we find the real story. Austria didn't just improve in one superficial area. They attacked gender inequality from both the bottom up and the top down.
Right.
They simultaneously dismantled what we might call the grassroots barriers and the glass ceiling.
Okay, let's unpack that using slide 5. I want to look at the glass ceiling first. The data you pulled on political empowerment is fascinating. You used this cool little icon array of people to represent parliament seats.
Right. If you look at female representation in the national parliament, the historical data is incredibly stark. Throughout the entire decade of the 1990s, the share of seats held by women in Austria was totally stagnant.
Like completely flat.
It sat at exactly 24.69%. It literally did not move for 10 years.
Stuck at a quarter of the room. Exactly. But then as the timeline moves into the 2000s and beyond, we see this deliberate systemic push. It isn't just a gradual cultural shift, it's driven by policy.
Wow.
By 2023, that number has nearly doubled, reaching an impressive 42.8%. That is a massive shift in who physically holds the levers of legislative power. You are changing the fundamental makeup of the decision makers.
And it makes complete logical sense. When you change the decision makers, you change the policies that get drafted. You change the funding priorities.
Exactly.
Which brings us perfectly to the grassroots level you mentioned. Specifically, the data you highlighted on the right side of slide 5 regarding reproductive health and autonomy.
I would argue this is perhaps the most profound metric in the entire data set you provided, the adolescent birth rate.
Yeah, this chart was wild.
This metric tracks the number of births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19. In 1990, Austria was seeing 22.5 births per 1,000 adolescents.
Which, for a highly developed European nation, is a fairly significant number.
It is. But look at the trajectory in your data. It collapses. It drops down to 13 by the year 2000, down to 10 by 2010, and by 2023, it is sitting at an astonishingly low 3.8.
22.5 down to 3.8. That isn't just a statistical improvement on a spreadsheet. That represents a fundamental, lived transformation of adolescence for young women in Austria.
If we connect this to the broader socioeconomic picture, driving down adolescent birth rates is the absolute prerequisite for economic equality.
How so?
It correlates perfectly with women entering higher education and the labor force. When a young woman has complete autonomy over her reproductive health through access to contraception, comprehensive sex education, and healthcare, she isn't forced into early, unplanned motherhood.
Right. She stays in school.
Exactly. She delays childbirth until she is economically secure.
And we see the direct result of that in slide 8, where you mapped out the educational parity using a dumbbell plot. The equality is absolute.
Oh, the expected years of schooling?
Yes. By 2023, the expected years of schooling for women in Austria is 16.28 years. For men, it's actually slightly lower at around 15.7 years. Women have achieved perfect parity and even a slight statistical advantage in expected education.
The secondary education attainment data supports this too. 98.7% of women aged 25 and older have at least some secondary education, compared to 98.6% of men.
So the historical gap is entirely gone.
It has been erased.
And consequently, your data shows the labor force participation rate for women climbing from 43% in 1990 to almost 57% in 2023.
Yeah.
What your research so brilliantly highlights here is that biological rights and health are a dual engine for societal and economic transformation. You give women autonomy over their biology, you give them equal access to education, and they naturally integrate into the economic and political power structures.
It creates a self-reinforcing loop of empowerment.
Right. To textbook execution of human development. Over those 33 years, Austria successfully solved some of the most critical, entrenched social inequalities of the 20th century.
They did.
Okay, so far, Austria sounds like an absolute utopia. We have incredible compounding wealth. We have long, healthy lives protected by robust safety nets. We have top-tier global gender equality and educational parity. But yes, there's always a but when we look at data sets this deep and comprehensive. Your presentation transitions here to the hidden leaks in the system. Slide 6, the illusion of prosperity.
Yes, this is where we peel back the surface layer of that pristine national average. Your research introduces a metric called the IHDI, the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index.
Right, let's break down how this works for the listener. The standard HDI we've been talking about gives us the national average. But the IHDI penalizes that score based on how unevenly those achievements are distributed across the population.
Precisely. It uses a mathematical formula called the Atkinson inequality measure.
Okay, sounds complicated.
Think of it this way. If a country had perfectly equal distribution of health, education, and income, meaning every single citizen had the exact same lifespan, degrees, and bank account, their standard HDI and their inequality-adjusted HDI would be exactly the same.
The penalty would be 0.
Exactly. But no country is perfect. When you run Austria's 2023 data through the UN's inequality adjustment, you get this huge waterfall chart on slide 6. 7.419% of its human development just evaporate.
You labeled it the invisible evaporation of well-being. So what does this all mean? Where is that 7.4% going? Because an almost 7.5% penalty in a country this highly developed is significant.
It is.
Your research breaks this penalty down on slide 7 into 3 underlying pillars of inequality to find the culprit.
Exactly. We look at where the distribution fails. First, we look at education inequality. The data shows it is incredibly low in Austria, sitting at just 2.6%. Yeah. This means the variance between the most educated and least educated citizens is very small. The state provides excellent, accessible public education across the board.
Which makes perfect sense based on what we just discussed regarding women's educational parity. Everyone is getting into the classroom.
Second, we look at life expectancy inequality, also remarkably low at 3.2%.
Okay.
This proves the universal healthcare system is functioning as intended. Rich or poor, Austrians generally have access to the same life-saving treatments, resulting in similar lifespans regardless of class.
But then we hit the third pillar in your bar chart, the income inequality. You colored this bar bold black to make it stand out against the gray ones, and this is where the penalty comes from. The income inequality sits at a stubborn 15.6%.
Yep, there's the leak.
Now wait, I need to play devil's advocate here and push back on this because it seems contradictory. We just established that 98% of the population has secondary education. We established that everyone is living long, healthy lives. We established that women have entered the workforce in massive numbers.
Right.
If everyone is highly educated, healthy, and working, why is the wealth gap so stubbornly wide? How can income inequality be 5 times higher than education inequality in the same country?
It's a brilliant question, and it points to the absolute structural reality of modern developed capitalist economies.
Okay, lay it on me.
The Austrian state, like many European welfare states, does a brilliant job providing equal public goods. The schools, the hospitals, the civic infrastructure, the public transit, these are socialized and distributed incredibly well. There's a high floor that nobody is allowed to fall beneath.
Okay, that please.
But the private market, the actual distribution of capital, corporate profits, and private wages, still heavily favors the top earners.
So the government can guarantee you a good education and a hospital bed, but they cannot guarantee you a high-paying job, and they certainly don't guarantee you a share of the capital gains from the stock market or real estate.
Exactly. This is the classic dynamic where the return on capital outpaces economic growth. Even with high labor force participation and incredible education, if the massive economic gains of the last 30 years, remember that 37% jump in gross national income,
Yeah.
if those gains are disproportionately captured by the wealthiest 10% of the population, your income inequality metric is going to remain rigid.
Wow.
And looking at the raw CSV data you provided, this income inequality number was 15.9% in 2010, and it's 15.6% in 2023.
So it hasn't changed at all.
30 years of technological and social progress, and the fundamental wealth gap has barely twitched.
It is the core pain point dragging down the overall societal well-being. It's the internal strife of a highly developed nation. The state can fix your health and your education, but it struggles to equalize your wallet. But as significant as a 7.4% domestic leak is, it is absolutely nothing compared to the global hemorrhage your research is about to expose on slide 9.
Right. The internal leak of income inequality is concerning for domestic policy, but the external threat we are about to discuss is existential.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And I mean, this is the entire crux of the deep dive. This is where we finally solve the mystery of your opening hook.
The missing 18.6%.
Yes. So if everything looks relatively perfect at home, high HDI, great healthcare, solid education, why does the United Nations penalize Austria's overall score so heavily when we look at the global picture? What are they doing outside their borders?
This is where your presentation introduces the most devastating metric in modern economics, the PHDI.
The Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
Exactly.
Let me set the scene for the listener based on slide 9. You have these two semicircles facing each other. On the left, we have Austria's pristine standard HDI score 0.930, elite. But then you put a big red VS in the middle. On the right, the data shows that when we add the Earth's carrying capacity into the math, when we actually ask the planet to foot the bill for the Austrian lifestyle, that score doesn't just dip.
It crashes.
It plummets to 0.757, a massive 18.6% drop. Nearly a fifth of their human progress is wiped out.
What's fascinating here is how the UN actually calculates this penalty. They introduced this metric in 2020 as a paradigm shift in how we view success.
Okay, how does the math work?
They take the standard HDI score and multiply it by an adjustment factor. That adjustment factor measures two specific physical environmental metrics: carbon footprint per capita and material footprint per capita.
Right.
If a country exerts zero excess pressure on the planet, if they are perfectly sustainable, their multiplier is 1, and their HDI score stays exactly the same. But Austria's multiplier drags them down by nearly a fifth.
So let's unpack the two villains driving this massive penalty, starting with slide 10, the carbon footprint. Your research tracks the per capita production of CO2 emissions. In 1990, Austria was emitting 8.09 tons of CO2 per capita.
Yeah.
In 2023, it's down to 6.53 tons.
Now, on paper, a downward trend is technically a good thing. The data shows it peaked around 2005 at 9.6 tons and has been slowly coming down since, thanks to some adoption of renewables and better energy efficiency. But as your analysis brilliantly points out, with that dotted trend line, the slope of that decline is agonizingly slow.
You even added a note that says, still above global safety thresholds. It is nowhere near the steep trajectory required to meet global climate targets like the Paris Agreement.
Not even close. The slight reduction in domestic carbon production is completely insufficient to offset the sheer size of the Austrian economic machine.
Right.
But there is an even more deceptive element to this carbon data that we have to discuss: the difference between production emissions and consumption emissions.
Oh, this is vital. Break this down for us.
Often, highly developed nations point to their declining domestic carbon footprint and pat themselves on the back. But in reality, they haven't stopped consuming carbon-intensive goods. They have just offshored their dirty manufacturing to developing nations in Asia or South America.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. They import the finished steel, the electronics, the cheap textiles, and the carbon emissions from manufacturing those goods go onto the developing nation's ledger, not Austria's.
It's like claiming your house is spotless and completely smoke-free, but only because you're paying your neighbor to burn all your daily trash in their backyard.
That is a great way to put it.
The smoke is still in the air. It's still entering the atmosphere and warming the globe. It's just on someone else's property deed, so you don't have to report it.
That is the perfect analogy, and that is exactly why the UN realized carbon footprint alone wasn't enough to measure ecological damage, which perfectly sets up the ultimate villain of your dataset on slide 11.
The true pain point.
The metric that absolutely destroys Austria's score. The material footprint.
The material footprint. This is the metric that you cannot hide.
Exactly. The material footprint is much harder to offshore or manipulate with accounting tricks. This metric tracks the actual physical resources that are extracted globally to meet the final consumer demand of a country.
Okay.
It doesn't matter where it was mined or manufactured. If the final product is consumed in Austria, the weight of the raw materials counts against Austria.
So, to be clear, we are talking about physical mass here.
What?
What categories are we actually weighing?
The UN categorizes it into 4 main buckets. Biomass, which is food, wood, and agricultural products.
Right.
Fossil energy carriers like coal, oil, and gas. Metal ores like iron, copper, and lithium. And non-metallic minerals, which is mostly sand, gravel, and limestone, used for concrete and construction.
So if an Austrian consumer buys a new electric vehicle or a smartphone in Vienna, the lithium mined in South America, the copper wired in Asia, and the fossil fuels burned to ship it across the ocean all count towards the Austrian citizen's material footprint.
Yes. You cannot offshore the reality of consumption.
Precisely. It tracks the physical reality of consumer demand. And the numbers your research uncovered here are absolutely staggering. In 1990, Austria's material footprint was 24.88 tons per capita.
Almost 25 tons of physical earth extracted, processed, and consumed per person per year.
And in 2023, it was 25.84 tons.
I really want the listener to stop and visualize this. 25.8 tons. That is roughly the physical mass of 12 average-sized cars assigned to every single man, woman, and child in Austria every single year.
It's massive.
And the most shocking part of your analysis on slide 11 is the trend line. You drew a red warning line straight across the chart. It's completely brutally flat. 33 years have passed. We have lived through an unprecedented technological revolution.
Right, the internet age. We invented the internet. We transitioned to digital service-based economies. We have apps for everything. And despite all of that digitization, the average Austrian is physically consuming more of the earth today than they did in 1990.
It completely shatters the illusion of the weightless modern economy.
Yeah, totally.
We have this pervasive assumption in the developed world that because we stream music on Spotify instead of buying physical plastic CDs, or because we send emails instead of paper letters, or read Wikipedia instead of buying heavy encyclopedias, that we are naturally using fewer resources. We think we are dematerializing.
But wait, I have to push back here because that logic intuitively makes sense to me.
It does to most people.
Austria is famous for green technology, incredible recycling programs, digital infrastructure. If everything is smaller, more efficient, and digital, how on earth are we extracting more physical mass than in the 90s?
Because the digital world is entirely dependent on a massive, hidden physical infrastructure.
Okay, explain that.
To stream that music, you need colossal, energy-hungry data centers built with thousands of tons of concrete and steel. You need fiber optic cables crisscrossing the ocean floor. You need smartphones packed with rare earth metals.
Oh.
And because of planned obsolescence, you replace that phone every 2 years instead of keeping a landline for 20 years. The efficiency of the digital economy doesn't reduce consumption, it accelerates it.
Wow. I never thought of it that way.
The sheer scale of modern consumption, the constant upgrading of technology, the fast fashion, the globalized shipping of out-of-season food requires massive, sustained physical extraction from the earth.
25.8 tons per person every single year. It's almost impossible to picture that amount of material being chewed up by a society.
And this brings us to the core structural contradiction of the entire Austrian model. This is where slide 12 of your presentation connects the two halves of the ledger.
The structural contradiction slide.
Yes. How do we reconcile the beautiful wealth graph, the 37% rise in GNI, with the terrifying environmental graph of a 25.8-ton material footprint?
You indexed these two metrics against each other in your data, starting at a baseline of 100 in the year 1990. We have the GNI wealth line shooting upward by 37%, and right alongside it, stubbornly tracking it, the material footprint line rises by roughly 4%.
If we connect this to the broader field of environmental economics, what we are looking at is the failure of the ultimate economic holy grail, the concept of decoupling.
Decoupling. This is a massive buzzword in policy circles right now. Let's explain the mechanics of what economists mean when they say they want to decouple.
The goal of decoupling is to break the historical link between economic growth and environmental degradation. Economists want to prove that you can grow the economy, make the wealth line go up, while simultaneously making the resource consumption line go down.
Right, they want to get richer without eating the planet.
Exactly. And there are two types of decoupling, relative and absolute.
Okay, what's the difference?
Relative decoupling means the economy is growing faster than your resource use. So maybe your economy grows by 10%, but your resource use only grows by 2%. You are getting more efficient, but you are still using more stuff.
Still extracting more overall.
Exactly. Absolute decoupling, which is what the planet actually needs to survive, means the economy grows by 10% and your resource use actually drops by 5%.
But looking at Austria's index data over 33 years, they haven't achieved absolute decoupling at all. They are moving in the exact same direction. The wealth goes up, the material extraction goes up. Austria has entirely failed to decouple.
And the reason decoupling is so difficult, some economists argue it's mathematically impossible under our current system, is due to a phenomenon called the Jevons paradox.
Oh, the Jevons paradox. I love this concept. Explain how this ruins our green tech dreams.
William Stanley Jevons was a 19th century economist who noticed something weird about coal. When they invented more efficient steam engines that use less coal per hour, you would think total coal consumption would drop, right?
Yeah, that seems like common sense.
But instead, it skyrocketed. Why? Because the increased efficiency made steam power cheaper and more profitable, so people built way more steam engines.
So as we get more efficient at using a resource, we don't save the resource. We just find more ways to exploit it because it's cheaper.
Exactly. We invent a more energy-efficient LED light bulb, so instead of saving electricity, we decide to leave the lights on all night, or we build giant illuminated billboards.
It's a trap.
It is. The efficiency gains are immediately swallowed by an increase in total consumption. And this also exposes the illusion of the circular economy. We talk about recycling our way out of this, but due to the laws of thermodynamics, you can't recycle a material infinitely.
Right. Materials degrade.
Exactly. Paper fibers shorten, plastics degrade, metals get mixed with alloys. A growing economy will always require a massive influx of virgin materials.
So Austria's economic growth is not some intellectual, weightless, purely digital phenomenon. Their wealth is fundamentally subsidized by devouring physical resources.
Yes.
They haven't found a magical new way to generate well-being. They've just optimized the machine that extracts it from the earth.
And when you apply that ecological lens globally, as your research does in slide 13, the geopolitical hierarchy completely shifts.
This is the slope graph, right?
Yes. You analyzed what happens to global rankings when we transition from the standard HDI to the planetary pressures-adjusted PHDI.
When we force countries to pay their ecological debts, Austria drops 3 places in the global rankings, down to 25th in the world.
Now, a 3-place drop might not seem like a free fall on paper, but the absolute evaporation of that 18.6% of their score exposes a deep environmental fragility in the entire developed model. It suggests that what we call development in the West is heavily reliant on an ecological overdraft. We are living on borrowed time and borrowed resources.
This raises a terrifying question for you, the listener. Does high income have to mean high pollution? Is what we call human development just a polite bureaucratic term for environmental extraction?
It's a dark thought.
Because if a country with the incredible governance, the massive wealth, the brilliant engineering, and the highly educated populace of Austria can't figure out how to grow without consuming 25 tons of the earth per citizen, who can?
It's a really sobering realization. We've mastered how to distribute well-being among humans, at least in highly socialized nations like Austria, but we have absolutely no idea how to do it without cannibalizing the host system.
Which brings us perfectly to the conclusion of your research, slide 14, the crossroads. You synthesize this massive 33-year narrative into a brilliant structural breakdown. You visualize the concept of Austrian prosperity as being held up by three distinct pillars.
Let's review them.
Pillar 1 is the social victory. This is a solid, gleaming pillar. Unprecedented life expectancy reaching almost 82 years, near-perfect educational parity between men and women, and a global top 10 ranking in gender equity.
They conclusively won the 20th century battles for public health and basic human rights.
Then we have Pillar 2, the internal strife. A pillar with some visible structural cracks. This is the stubborn persistence of a 15.6% income inequality gap that decades of massive wealth accumulation has totally failed to close.
Right. The market is growing rapidly, but the capitalist mechanics of that market do not naturally distribute that growth fairly, leaving a permanent gap between the elite and the working class.
And finally, Pillar 3, the external threat. In your visual design, this pillar is violently cracking, buckling under immense weight. This is the complete failure to decouple economic growth from material consumption.
It is the 25.8-ton per capita material footprint that threatens to collapse the entire global structure.
Your research makes it incredibly clear that this data isn't just a physical checkup for Austria alone. You've used Austria as the ultimate case study, but this is a mirror held up to every single highly developed nation on Earth.
The US, the UK, Germany, Canada, all of them.
It forces us to fundamentally reevaluate what we consider success. Are we content looking at gross development, the shiny HDI number, or do we need to start aggressively measuring net development after the planet pays its share?
Because right now, the planet's share is an 18.6% penalty, and the planet is running out of credit to extend to us.
And that leads us to the final, incredibly provocative thought you left us with on slide 15.
The stark white slide.
Yeah, just a completely blank white background with a single sentence right in the middle. If the Earth isn't sustainable, what ledger does human development go on?
It's the ultimate accounting problem. We are writing massive checks for our own longevity, our own comfort, and our own digital wealth, but the planet's ecological bank account cannot cash those checks anymore.
It really leaves you with something profound to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. If our current models of peak development require a massive ecological overdraft, perhaps the next great leap in human progress isn't about raising the ceiling of what we can achieve.
Maybe we don't need a higher GNI or more stuff.
Exactly. Maybe the next leap is about completely redesigning the foundation our society is built upon.
We have to ask ourselves, what would a highly developed nation look like if its material footprint was slashed in half, down to 12 tons instead of 25?
What policies would that actually require? Are we talking about transitioning to degrowth economics, where we deliberately scale down destructive industries while guaranteeing public services?
Or maybe capping extreme wealth.
Or completely outlawing planned obsolescence, so a smartphone legally has to last 10 years. Is it even possible to live an 82-year, high-income, high-tech life without consuming 25 tons of the earth every single year?
That is the defining challenge of the 21st century. Austria showed us how to conquer the mechanics of human development. Now they and the rest of the developed world have to figure out how to survive the consequences of that development.
This was an absolute masterclass in data analysis and structural storytelling. Thank you so much to you, the listener, for compiling this incredibly deep data set, designing this brilliant presentation, and guiding us through this paradox.
It was a privilege to review.
Keep analyzing the numbers, keep challenging the comfortable narratives, and keep asking the big, uncomfortable questions. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.